I'm on my way back, as I said, from Asia. I'm currently at Narita Airport, and I learned something new today with the way that lounge access that comes with a business or first class ticket is issued. Hey everybody, welcome to the Abroaders Travel Podcast, your weekly meetup with thousands of entrepreneurs, hustlers, creators, nomads, ninjas, wanderers, and world changers, all seeking to build the skills and connections to live a life without borders. If you want to learn more about what we do or download our entire podcast archive, check out the website, abroaders.com. Happy Wednesday morning and welcome to another episode of the Abroaders Podcast. I am Erik, checking in from Narita International Airport in Tokyo, Japan. I am on my way back to the United States. We haven't lost AJ, but with the 12-hour time difference, he's still based in Michigan. So we've had a huge amount of stuff going on with the Abroaders, and there hasn't really been a good opportunity for us to sync up to do an episode together. So today I want to take a little bit of time to talk with you guys about managing the logistics of connecting itineraries when you're booking award flights. So this is both about connecting separate award itineraries. If you have to book one itinerary and then you need to book another itinerary with a different airline or a different points currency, and also connecting award flights with paid positioning flights. So this can be a scenario where you maybe are able to find the big piece of the travel that you need, so maybe the flight across the Pacific Ocean, but you can't find the final connection to get to your end destination. And so we're going to talk about that and a few of the considerations that you need to make in terms of minimum connection times and the logistics of what happens when you've got an award ticket and you've also got a purchase ticket. Because one of the big advantages to having all of your travel on a single record locator or with a single airline or alliance is that there's sort of a joint responsibility for getting you to your destination. And so when you do combine paid tickets with award bookings, or you combine two totally separate airlines that are not in the same alliance on two different award itineraries, there can be problems if you misconnect because, United Airlines arriving late is not really American Airlines' problem since they're in separate alliances. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Show notes for today's episode can be found at abroaders.com/connections. All right, so first of all, let's talk a little bit more about why this can happen. So the first reason that you might need to end up with a separate itinerary or a couple of different record locators on the same trip is based on award availability. And so when you're searching for an award, and we've talked about this before on the show, your first priority is to find the long overseas segment, which for business and first class award tickets can be considerably more difficult because those seats are pretty competitive. And it's simultaneously quite a bit more important because you'll be spending anywhere from 12 to 16 hours on board the flight if you're flying from the US to Asia. And so the quality of the hard and soft product really matter that much more for your travel experience. So you want to prioritize that part of your trip and then piece the other parts together. So, for example here, you may be able to get the overseas segment, but not the connecting flights with points. So in those cases, one of the best options can be to just buy the ongoing segment. And so let me give you an example. My trip out to Asia, I went out for the Bangkok conference, the Dynamite Circle conference in Bangkok, Thailand. And my outbound itinerary was from Detroit. And so I went from Detroit, connected in Chicago, and then flew Chicago to Hong Kong. And my desired destination, obviously, was Bangkok here. But I decided to stop my award itinerary in Hong Kong. In this particular example, the reason for doing that was about award pricing. So in this case, Hong Kong is still considered part of North Asia. And because I was using U.S. Airways miles, going to North Asia is only 110,000 round trip in business class and 120,000 round trip in first class. And that's actually a really big difference between that and going to South Asia, which is where Bangkok is. So if I had taken that award itinerary, and in this case there was availability. So if I had booked my ticket from Detroit to Bangkok directly, I would have ended up paying 160,000 miles for that first class ticket instead of 120. So there's a 40,000 mile savings just by stopping short in Hong Kong, and that's only about a 3-hour flight away from Bangkok. So the logic there is that I prioritized the overseas segment. I had a 15-hour flight in Cathay Pacific first class, which was awesome. And so the difference there, the trade-off, is that if I had booked all the way to Bangkok, I would have flown business class the whole way, and it still would have cost me 120,000 points. So for the same number of miles, I got to upgrade to first class, and all I had to do was brave a 3-hour flight in economy to get from Hong Kong to Bangkok. So let's talk a little bit more about some of the other reasons that this can happen, because this actually does come up quite a bit. One of the other reasons that you could end up having to sort of get creative with your award itinerary is the issue of standard versus peak or saver availability. So as you guys recall from some previous episodes, airlines like to price their award tickets at different levels. And so if they've got a whole bunch of availability, you're likely to see that cheaper price in miles, which is the saver awards. And then they move on up, and if there's a little bit less availability, maybe they think they're going to sell some more of those tickets. That's where you come across the standard award availability or even the peak award availability, where the prices can be 2 or 3 times as high. So obviously those are not a good deal, and so you want to avoid that as well. So let me break this down just to try and make it a little bit more clear where the distinction is between the award itinerary and the paid flights in this particular example for my US Airways redemption. So what I did is I booked a round trip ticket from Detroit to Hong Kong with a stopover in Hong Kong and then onward to Tokyo, Japan. So Tokyo was the destination. So basically the award trip is Detroit, Hong Kong with a stopover, and then Hong Kong to Tokyo. Tokyo's the destination. That's one way. And then the return was Tokyo back to Detroit. So that really utilizes the US Airways flexibility and routing rules in that I get the opportunity to do a stopover and a one-way on my award travel. But considering where I actually wanted to travel, that left some pretty significant gaps to fill. And so the first one was that I had to get from Hong Kong, which was my stopover on the way out, to Bangkok for this conference. And so what I did there is I booked from Hong Kong to Bangkok. I booked using British Airways miles and was able to get a pretty good deal on, a one-way flight on US Airways from Hong Kong to Bangkok. And then on the way back, it didn't really make sense to use miles. The flights on AirAsia were super cheap. So I actually paid for a ticket about $100 to get from Bangkok back to Hong Kong. And so what I want you guys to think about here is the connection time. So I've got my international itinerary coming in from Chicago to Hong Kong. And then I've got a separate award itinerary on British Airways to get from Hong Kong to Bangkok. And so the really key thing here is you want to make sure you leave yourself enough time, because it's not all on one record locator. And so if the outbound flight on Cathay Pacific from Chicago to Hong Kong ends up being late, then I don't necessarily have really any position any leverage to bargain with the flight that I missed in the event that I'm going to miss that onward ticket from Hong Kong to Bangkok. So generally, as a general rule, you want to leave about 2 hours minimum connection time when you need to transit a foreign country. And one of the reasons is that there's a chance, that you're going to have to clear customs. It's not always the case, but especially when you're on separate award tickets, sometimes to be able to pick up your onward ticket, you're going to have to go to the departures lounge where all the check-in gates are. And sometimes that's going to be outside of security. So unless you're able to get all of your boarding passes printed before you leave, you're most likely going to have to leave yourself extra time to go out and pick up your bags, go out of security, get your new boarding pass, and then get back in. So that's a really important consideration you want to make. You want to leave yourself enough time to do that. Now, the next thing to think about is, when does it make sense to cut it a little bit closer? So like I said, 2 hours is generally the minimum, but there are some situations where you can push that a little bit. And so I want to talk about a couple of tools that can help you see how protected you are in case something goes wrong. And so the first one is Tripit Pro, which is a really phenomenal tool. Tripit is a free service, so I highly encourage you guys to sign up for the regular Tripit. But we opted to offer all of the Abroaders Premium customers Tripit Pro just because it's such a valuable tool to help people manage this type of situation. So what Tripit Pro does is it lets you find alternative flights, and it makes it possible for you to see if there's later flights in the day that you could get moved to in the event that you show up late. So let's say I'm supposed to be into Hong Kong at 3 o'clock, and the onward flight that I got using British Airways points for the next itinerary, totally separate award itinerary, is at 5 o'clock. So I left myself 2 hours. But let's say, we all know O'Hare is a horrible airport. So let's say between going from Detroit to Chicago, my flight for Hong Kong left really late, and I'm not going to make my connection. So the reason Tripit Pro is really helpful is it can give you all the later flights in the day. So the flight that I had was at 5 o'clock, but there was also a flight at 6 o'clock, a flight at 7 o'clock, and a flight at 8:30. So in that case, I know that I'm protected because I've got those other flights that I can get bumped to if I miss my original connecting flight. Now, if your connection flight, whether it's paid or another award itinerary, is the last one of the day, you got to be prepared for the fact that if something goes wrong with your first itinerary, you might be stranded overnight. And so in my case, that was totally unacceptable. I didn't want to take too much of a risk because I was arriving the day that the Dynamite Circle conference was starting. So that's a really important thing to take into consideration. The other tool that you should know about, now this is a paid tool as well, but there is a 5-day free trial, which you can use, just in the case that you're booking a flight. And honestly, a little bit of a gray hat tip here is that the 5-day free trial is limited to new email addresses. So even if you've signed up for that 5-day trial before, you can sign up with a different email address and get it again. So you can get away with using it a few times. Honestly, I think Expert Flyer is well worth paying $5 or $10 a month, depending on what package you're looking for. But the way that you use Expert Flyer in conjunction with Tripit Pro is Expert Flyer lets you see how many award seats are available on a bunch of these flights, and it also lets you see how many seats are being sold on your safety flights. So in that case where I'm coming into Hong Kong and I'm supposed to be leaving at 5, I know I've got a safety flight at 6, at 7, and at 8:30. I can also use Expert Flyer to see how many seats are for sale on those flights. And so if they're like totally booked out, those safety flights, then they're not really safety flights for me, because in the end, if they're oversold, I'm not going to be able to get on those flights anyways. So I was able to use Expert Flyer and see that there were at least 25 or 30 seats in economy, and that meant that I had a really good chance in the event that I was going to end up missing my original flight to get bumped for another one. All right, so let's use another example here for a minute and talk a little bit about when there's not availability, or actually this comes more around the saver, standard, and peak availability. And so just this week I was working on an itinerary for a customer that wanted to travel from Austin, Texas to Singapore. And so the first thing that we're going to do here is take a look at the different international gateways from the U.S. that travel to Singapore. So in this case, we have Amex points as the primary currency here. And so we're looking first at the airports that get you to Singapore from the United States. So good examples here are Los Angeles, LAX, San Francisco, JFK in New York, and Houston International in Texas. And so because the customer is starting in Austin, we know that no matter what, once we find the award availability from one of those hub cities, Los Angeles, San Francisco, New York, or Houston, we've got to still find a way to get from Austin, Texas to Houston. And this applies for anything. Unless you live in one of those major hub airports that's just like a super highway to Asia or other places around the world, this is always going to be a component of what you have to do when you're working on building out those award itineraries, is figuring out how you're going to get from your home airport to the destination airport. So a couple of considerations here for adding that extra segment. The first one is there's a huge advantage to being able to find award availability for that connecting flight. And the reason being is that if you're booking the overseas, the segment from LA to Singapore or San Francisco to Singapore, if you're booking that in first or business class, you have the right to fly the domestic segment in first or business class as well if there's availability. And so that can be a really nice thing. It's probably about a 3-hour flight from Austin to LAX. And, that's not the worst thing in the world to be in economy there. But if you're already paying the miles and the taxes and fees to get a business class ticket, it's kind of nice to be able to find that domestic availability as well. So here's how we think about this kind of problem solving. First of all, we're going to check all those flights from the U.S. gateways to Singapore. So we looked at LA, we looked at Houston, and we looked at JFK. Houston and JFK didn't have anything for the dates that we were looking at, so we just crossed those off the list. Then we looked at LAX and San Francisco a little bit more carefully. And there's a couple of things that came into play. Now, remember before I was talking about those saver versus peak versus standard availability. So in business class, we've got LAX to Singapore, but it's only at standard availability. So it's going to be more expensive than the saver. And I forget the exact prices, but really you're looking at like 80,000 miles one way if you get a saver seat and 120,000 miles one way if you've got a standard seat. Now that's for business class. And actually that's going to be the case for both LA and San Francisco since Singapore has a zone-based chart here. So when you're looking at that, it's really important to remember that those standard and saver seats are based on the class of service. So in other words, here's the hack. Let me make this really simple. It was 120,000 points in business class because it was only standard awards available, but it was only 107,000 miles in first class because first class had the saver award. So you can actually save money by being in a better class of service in certain situations. Doesn't make any sense, but that's the way it works, and it's really good to know how to take advantage. So we get that set up, and one of the other big things that you got to look for here is the connections on this itinerary, right? Because if you're piecing together a couple of different flights, the LAX flight connects in Tokyo. And so that is like, this in particular case turned out to be really good because the connection time in Tokyo was like 1 hour and 55 minutes, and both segments here are in first class. And so this is like an ideal scenario. But the domestic partner here is United. And so to get to LAX from Austin, we've got to use United because Singapore is a Star Alliance airline. And so you can't use American on that award ticket because they're not partners. So your only option in the U.S. is to use that United flight. And United didn't have any business or first class domestic seats. So this leaves us with a decision to make. It's either you buy a first class ticket domestically so you can sit up front for those 3 hours, or you slug it out in coach if there's availability in economy. And in some cases there's not even availability in economy. Sometimes these flights get pushed out. So ideally you're going to piece it together and you're going to be able to fly from Austin or Denver or wherever your non-hub place in the US is, get to that international gateway like LAX, and then take your award itinerary in business class and spend 15 hours in a really, really comfortable situation for travel. But the biggest problem that comes up when we're booking tickets with this is going to be layover times. And so a lot of times, for example, getting from Austin to LA, you're looking at like a 6-hour layover. The only flight that's available to get from Austin to LA arrives pretty early in the morning, and the international flight from LA to Tokyo to Singapore leaves pretty late in the evening. So that can be a situation where it might not be worth including it on your award itinerary, especially if it's only economies available. So lay it out in these two choices. Choice one is you get to include the United segment in your award itinerary. So you pay 107,000 miles to Singapore Airlines and $300 in taxes, and you get a flight from Austin to LA, but it's in economy, so you spend 3 hours in economy, and you're going to have a 6-hour layover. And then you're going to have that really nice itinerary from LA to Tokyo to Hong Kong. The other option here, and this is one that gets overlooked a lot, is you can just buy a flight. So there's other airlines that operate flights from Austin to LA. Southwest Airlines is a good example. American also operates those flights, and Delta. So if you can't use United, you've got those other options. It's just that in those cases, you're going to have to buy the flight for cash, or you're going to have to use miles to get that flight. So those are a couple of things to think about. Hopefully that makes sense for you guys to just sort of map out the framework of how you should work on this. Personally, for me, I prefer to avoid those super long layovers unless I know that there's going to be like a really nice lounge that I'm going to have access to, that I can get some work done, or even, in the other case, if the stopover city is a really interesting place, sometimes it makes sense to make that connection time even longer. 6 hours isn't enough time really to get out of the airport, but if you want to make it 20 hours and take off the next morning, then you've got time to go out and see the city a little bit, spend a night in a hotel, and come back. It's up to you if that makes sense for your travel preferences, but something else to keep in mind. So the next thing I want to talk about with piecing together these itineraries is lounge access. And this actually came up on my return trip. So I'm on my way back, as I said, from Asia. I'm currently at Narita Airport, and I learned something new today with the way that lounge access that comes with a business or first class ticket is issued. So I also have the American Express Platinum card, which comes with the Priority Pass Select, which gives you access to a lot of lounges around the world. So that's a really good thing to have in your back pocket. But in general, I was counting on being able to use the lounges here at Narita Airport during my 20-hour layover. And that turned out to be a little bit of a mistake. And so I want to make one distinction. There's two different locations for lounges. Some lounges are airside, which means that they're behind security. So you have to have a boarding pass to get into the secured area before you have access to the lounge. The other ones are landside, so that they're in front of security, and you don't necessarily have to clear security or have your boarding pass to get into the lounge. And so there's actually a couple of landside lounges at Narita Airport. So I kind of lucked out here. Even though I wasn't able to use my boarding pass, that's a first class ticket for tomorrow to get into the first class lounge, I was able to use the Priority Pass lounges that are landside. Unfortunately, at Narita Airport, the lounges are complete crap that are landside. So it's going to be interesting. I'll hopefully be able to report back to you guys next week and let you know what the experience was like in the first class lounge tomorrow. But basically, when I arrived from Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam, I was on a business class ticket with Japan Airlines. And so I had my ticket stub, and I was really hoping I was going to be able to get into either the Japan business class lounge based on my flight that I took today, or the Japan first class lounge based on my flight out tomorrow. And neither of those worked out because the ticket desk will not issue that ticket until the day of travel. So I got to wake up at, the earliest I can do it is like 7:30 in the morning tomorrow. Then I can get my boarding pass, and then I can clear security and go to the nice first class lounge. So that's something really important you want to keep in mind as well, is just try and keep track of where those lounges are. Priority Pass, if you do have the American Express or a few other premium credit cards that offer the Priority Pass Select product, they've got a great mobile app for Android and iOS where you can see all the lounges, and it tells you where they are, and it tells you whether they're airside or landside. So that's a really valuable tool. The last thing to keep in mind here is overnight accommodation. So I had planned out, I knew that I was going to be flying on 2 separate award itineraries. I actually came from Ho Chi Minh City to here in business class on Japan Airlines, which I booked with American Airlines Miles. And so I knew I was going to have this 20-hour layover. It was already planned. And Narita's got a really interesting setup here with, it's called the 9-Hour Hotel. And it's basically a capsule hotel. So instead of having an actual room, they've got kind of a community area where there's like lockers and showers, private showers and private lockers and all that stuff. But your actual accommodation is just a tube that's about 3.5 feet wide and 3.5 feet tall. So you just kind of crawl into this bed and shut the door behind you, and you've got like an enclosed place to sleep. I think it's a completely awesome idea to have. I can't tell you how many times I've slept on the floor at airports or on chairs that are incredibly uncomfortable. So just having that as an option is really cool, and it's super cheap. It's like $35 for the evening. So I've got, checked in at 3 o'clock. Don't have to check out until 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. And I've got a place to store all my gear and a place to take a shower and a place to sleep tonight. So that's a really good benefit, and you definitely want to check that out in advance, because in this case, I was thinking about going to stay with a friend in downtown Tokyo, or maybe getting a hotel somewhere in Tokyo, and it was going to cost more than $100 just to get round trip from the airport to my friend's house, and throw in some food and other stuff going on. It was going to be way more expensive to leave the airport than to just get one of these tube hotels. So definitely interesting, and I'm going to post some pictures. I walked around in there and took some photos. If you haven't seen one of these things, it's definitely worth checking out. A pretty interesting experience. All right, that's it for this week's show, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in, and apologies for the background noise, although I do have to say this is one of the quietest airports I've ever been in at an hour of 10 o'clock p.m. Pretty impressed that I was able to actually pull off a recording here in the terminal. So anyways, thank you guys for being with us. This week's International Jam comes from a group called Monkey Safari. The track is called Sirens. I hope you guys enjoy. I will be back in Michigan over Christmas. We will be taking a break, or potentially doing a short episode over Christmas, and then we'll be back in full force for 2015. Wherever you are, travel safe, and I look forward to seeing you somewhere around the world in 2015. Take care. Cheers. Hey brothers, don't be shy. Hop over to the website and join our email list for exclusive travel hacking content. If you like what we're up to, the best way you can support the show is by leaving us a 5-star review on iTunes. Lastly, we would love to hear from you, so send your show feedback to Erik or AJ at abroaders.com. We will see you next week.